You know, there are certain phrases in the Bible that just stick with you. They're full of mystery and power, and one of them signals maybe the most dramatic moment in all of human history.
So what are we talking about? The Last Trumpet. I mean, we've all heard that phrase, right? It's supposed to be this epic moment. We're talking the return of the Messiah, the resurrection of the dead, a complete and total transformation of, well, everything. But what is it really? Is it just a metaphor? A literal trumpet blast? Or, and this is the big question for us today, could it be a clue to something much, much bigger that we've kind of overlooked?
Okay, so here's the Apostle Paul, and he's writing to the believers in ancient Corinth. To our modern ears, this sounds so poetic, doesn't it? Very symbolic. But here's the thing you got to ask yourself. What if, for the people reading this for the very first time, it wasn't poetry at all? What if the Last Trumpet wasn't just a turn of phrase, but a specific, scheduled event that they all knew was already on the calendar? And you know what's wild? To crack this code, we don't actually need to invent some new, complicated theory. The answer, it turns out, is hidden in an ancient calendar. A calendar from the Hebrew Scriptures. It's like the key has been hiding in plain sight this whole time. So this ancient calendar, it points us to one very specific festival, an appointed time that, as we're about to see, holds the key to this entire prophetic puzzle. This festival is called Yom Teruah. Now, biblically, this means the Day of Trumpets, or even more powerfully, the Day of the Awakening Blast. You might know it today as Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year. But, and this is crucial, its original biblical meaning goes so much deeper than just a New Year's party. It's way more profound. All right, so to really get why this one day is so important, we have to learn its language. Its prophetic vocabulary, if you will.
See, this festival isn't just known by one name. It's got several, and each one adds another layer to the prophetic story. So yeah, it's the Day of the Awakening Blast, but it's also called the Day of Remembrance, the Day of Judgment, and, get this, the Day of the Enthronement. Think about that, a day for crowning a king. Every single name is another piece of this giant puzzle.
And this all comes to a head in the ancient temple service for this day. The whole thing was structured around three powerful themes. First, you have the kingship verses, proclaiming God as king. Then, you have the remembrance verses, recalling all his promises. And finally, you have the trumpet verses, all about the sounding of the shofar. So you've got kingship, promises, and trumpets. That three-part sequence, that is the exact context we need.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's see what happens when we take the New Testament scriptures and lay them right next to the playbook for this ancient festival. Let's start with this super famous passage from Paul. He's describing the Lord's return with a cry of command, a shout, and the sound of God's trumpet. On the surface, it sounds like a completely unique, one-time-only event, right? But is it really?
Now, check this out. This verse from Psalm 47, this was one of the central psalms sung during the Yom Teruah service. The word for shout there is teruah. The trumpet is a shofar. Do you see it? Paul isn't just making up new imagery out of thin air. He's literally quoting the coronation ceremony for the king, word for word, right out of the festival songbook. It's incredible.
Okay, so that's the coronation part. But what about the other key event tied to this trumpet? The resurrection, the dead being raised. How does that fit into the festival of Yom Teruah?
Wouldn't you know it, it's found right there in the prophetic readings for the day. This incredibly powerful verse from Isaiah about the dead rising from the dust, this was a central part of the Yom Teruah service. So the themes of resurrection, of awakening, they weren't new ideas Paul was introducing. They were already woven into the very fabric of this specific festival.
This is a game changer. It means the New Testament writers weren't just inventing new, mysterious ideas. They were using a shared language their audience already knew backwards and forwards. They were quoting from the official songbook of Yom Teruah.
And once you see it, the connections just keep coming. That famous phrase, the Day of the Lord, it maps directly to one of the festival's other names, the Day of Judgment. And what about when the book of Revelation talks about a door opened in heaven or the books were opened? Well, that's a direct echo of the tradition that on this very day the heavenly books of judgment are opened. It's a perfect one-to-one match, over and over again.
So let's pull back for a second. What's the bigger picture here? What does all this mean?
It seems to suggest that biblical prophecy isn't just a random collection of events. It appears to follow a schedule, a divine timetable of appointed times.
You know, in Jewish tradition, there's this idea of three great, defining trumpet blasts in all of history. The first trumpet, that's the one that sounded at Mount Sinai. The great trumpet, that's the one that will sound at the very final redemption. So what about the one that sits right there in the middle? Well, that's the one we've been talking about this whole time.
The last trumpet. And this is so important to grasp. It isn't just the final trumpet in a series, like the 7 trumpets you read about in the book of Revelation. The last trumpet was basically a proper name. It was the name for a singular, monumental event, the shofar blast on Yom Teruah that announces the king's coronation and the resurrection of the dead. It's not just a sound. It's a specific date on God's calendar.
And if there's any doubt left at all, listen to what Paul says right after describing this whole trumpet return. He says, "But concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you." Now, why on earth wouldn't he need to explain it to them? The answer is simple. They were expected to know. They knew the festival calendar. They already knew about the appointed times.
All right, so let's just boil this all down. What are the key takeaways here? First, you just can't separate New Testament prophecy from its original Hebraic context. Second, the last trumpet isn't some big mystery. It's a direct reference to the festival of Yom Teruah. And third, and maybe most importantly, all of this points to the idea that biblical prophecy follows a divine calendar of appointed times.
And that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. You know, we're so used to thinking of the future as this total unknown, right? A complete mystery. But if the Bible actually contains a calendar, a schedule with divine appointments set for the most pivotal moments in history, what does that change about how we prepare for the future? How does that change things for you?